Sports Illustrated put out a list of underrated players on each team. And for the New York Jets, they end up coming across Tyler Conklin as the New York Jets' most underrated player. And, I think is something that I've said on this show and on my own channel. I think the production that we've seen from Tyler Conklin in his first 2 years with the Jets has been good, especially when you consider the quarterback play that he's dealt with. He had 621 receiving yards last year, no touchdowns, but the Jets as a team, I think it's 11 or 12 touchdown passes they had as a unit last year, which is just insane in 2023. But even in his first year, 552 yards, 3 touchdowns, and he was splitting time a little bit more with CJ Uzama in year one. But over the last 3 years, 593, 552, 621 in receiving yards. I think he's average to a slightly, maybe even slightly above average tight end, but gets treated like, I think, an afterthought by some Jet fans and by some NFL pundits when looking at this Jets, receiving core.
I think you're right. Honestly, maybe we've treated him as somewhat of an afterthought through some of our discussions as well. At least I think I have. I mean, we've talked about Mike Williams, Garrett Wilson, we've talked about Malachi Corley a lot, but I don't know if we've had a lot of conversation about Tyler Conklin on the show. And I think that this is a good opportunity to kind of give him the spotlight and highlight how great of a player he is and how he could be an absolute weapon within this New York Jets receiving core. So it's always interesting because when we talk receiving cores, everybody talks wide receivers, but they forget that the tight ends are pretty much an extension of the receiving core. And to have a really good tight end is obviously a big deal, especially with Aaron Rodgers. I feel like throughout his career, he's never really had necessarily that superstar tight end to play alongside, but he always finds a way to maximize the value of every tight end that he has in the lineup with him. I think that's really important for Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, I mean, we're just a few years away from a 2020 season that saw Robert Tonyan have 586 receiving yards and 11 touchdowns with Aaron Rodgers. Now, I don't know if we're going to get double-digit touchdowns from Tyler Conklin, but I wouldn't be surprised. This is someone who has, I believe, 7 career receiving touch. He might come close to his career receiving touchdowns in just this year. I think in the red zone specifically, that's an area where Rodgers likes to target the tight end. And the Jets just had one of the worst red zone offenses in the league last year. And that's how, a tight end who has over 600 receiving yards ends up with, 0 receiving touchdowns. That's still wild to me. But I mean, again, with a healthy quarterback and one who can move the ball, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Conklin creeping up closer to a top 10 tight end in the league, just in general. I think it was something like 12th in receptions and 14th in receiving yards, or maybe flip-flop that. But I think already he's a top half of the league tight end. And then, again, when you add in improved quarterback play on top of that, I think that's only a recipe for success for him.
I agree with you. I think that he's definitely in the top half, and he's a really good player and super productive considering how bad the quarterback situation has been for the Jets. But I do, in a way, want to play devil's advocate and say that maybe with all of those mouths to feed and with Aaron Rodgers coming back, Aaron Rodgers might maximize the value of other guys. And there is an opportunity here for Tyler Conklin to kind of become a forgotten man, not just with fans, but it is possible that the way that the offense is going to run this year, he might not get all that production, and it could have been production based on how bad the quarterback play was, force feeding the tight end, because bad quarterbacks usually have an easier time throwing short to the middle to tight ends rather than spreading the ball out to some of the wide receivers on the outside. So I guess I'd kind of ask you, why do you think maybe Tyler Conklin will thrive? Maybe why his production wasn't a result of having bad quarterback play rather than the opposite.
Yeah, so he was third on the team in targets last year. I think Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall were the two guys in front of him. And then it was Conklin third, and then a huge drop-off. Lazard was fourth after that with 49 targets. But for me, I think we see a very similar pecking order at the top. Garrett Wilson's going to be a target hog. I also think Breece Hall getting some dump-offs is going to be up there as well in the receiving game. I guess part of it, I think, is I'm unsure about Mike Williams' health going into this year. I think if he's fully healthy and like out of the gate looks like Mike Williams of old, then yeah, I probably would bump him as someone who would get more targets than Conklin this year. But then after that, I think Corley and Gibson are going to kind of split time in the slot. Maybe they lean Gibson a little bit more early on, and then Corley kind of comes on in the second half of the year, just because in years gone by with this regime, we've seen them take rookies, take their time with these rookies, especially at the receiving position. So I still think Conklin ends up probably top three in my opinion, at worst fourth in targets. And if that's the case, I think we could be looking at maybe he doesn't hit 620 yards again this year like he did last year, but maybe he's in that like the 5 to 600 range with more like 5 to 7 receiving touchdowns instead of 0, and then is kind of just looked at with a little bit more, again, respect, I guess, because he's getting in the end zone finally.
Yeah, putting up touchdowns will obviously be a big difference maker. I think that from the Giants' perspective, I remember when Kenny Galladay was signed because he led the league in receiving touchdowns a couple of seasons prior. Not necessarily had the craziest amount of yards, but putting touchdowns on the board obviously is the biggest difference maker in the sport. And so once you're doing that, you'll get the recognition that you deserve. And I think that'll happen for Tyler Conklin. One other thing that I found on Conklin that I thought was really interesting, this says, according to ESPN, he had 246 yards after the catch last season, which ranked number 17 in the NFL at his position. So I guess kind of middle of the road, but he had a quote recently speaking with the media saying one of the biggest points of emphasis for him this offseason has been working on yards after the catch. How do I turn a 5-yard catch into a 12-yard catch or a 15-yard catch is what he said. So maybe we'll see him get a little bit more active with the ball in his hands and start creating more yardage that way.
Yeah, I think he has the potential to be good yards after the catch. Like there are a few moments last year, but he didn't really do it with much consistency. And I guess I kind of also give him the benefit of the doubt because really outside of Breece and Garrett Wilson, wasn't really, and actually at points, Breece Hall wasn't consistent in the middle of the year. I think, he had some struggles with the offensive line play, but overall the Jets offense wasn't consistent at all last year, except for maybe consistently bad. So I kind of give him the benefit of the doubt a little bit, and who knows, maybe that's just, by Jets bias, peeking through, but I didn't, me personally, like I know through the draft process, with the whole Brock Bowers debates, I'd have been fine if they took him, but I was comfortable and still am comfortable with the Jets tight end room. So I don't think I look at it as, as big of a need as what maybe some other people